Hello, it is Friday, April 17th. I'm Greg Farrar, and this is my latest edition of the COVID-19 trend analysis. I do this with my own dashboards and using data from Corona Data Scraper, Our World in Data, and COVID tracking. And I'll just get straight into it. Well, first I'll say we're going to do the counties or the countries of the world first, as always. Then we're going to do the states of the United States, and then I'll end with the counties of California. Those are my focuses. So, looking as usual at the total cases. Whoops, I'm already in the county, aren't I? A minute to start in the countries. Looking here in the countries, as usual, we have the United States far away in the lead in total cases, followed by Spain, Italy, Germany, France, UK, Iran, the big ones. I'm seeing something strange here. I just want to make sure that I'm actually streaming. Yeah, okay. Well, the chat seems to be disabled. I'll just put my usual ask something here. I do believe I'm streaming. I'm just going to keep going. If it didn't work out, oh well. It's only one day, but I see 2 people watching. I see that it's streaming, so I think we're good. As usual, I am focused on growth rates more than totals, and I'm focused on new cases more than totals. So let's move on to the new cases. You can see here again, the United States is showing a pretty plateau-y series of dots here. The trend line has not yet quite caught up to this. And something is happening here also with my you can probably, you can see in the corner that I have, I've just realized, have I realized? I can watch my own video, and as I watch my own video, I don't know that you see when I point at a particular point. And that is really too bad, if that's true. If these little things that pop up here, but they seem to. I don't know, I'm getting 3 different views of the same thing, and one of them shows that right now I'm pointing at the United States and a little blue thing's popping up, and the live stream that I'm seeing doesn't show that, but the streaming software does show that. All right, I do think you see my little boxes, but you don't see my cursor. It really seems like it's at a plateau. It's certainly not obviously falling. It's got a mini trend up, and then it drops quickly, mini trend up, and then it drops, and then a mini trend up. And so we have almost a sawtooth here, but I think that's all just noise. I think it's kind of randomly hovering around the 30,000 mark of new cases each day. All the other countries and we'll see that on the growth graphs. These trend lines can be useful, especially for spotting the long-term trends, but sometimes they give results that appear to be clearly inaccurate to the visible eye. Now, as I look at this, I don't think we've seen ever quite so many of these trend lines obviously turning the corner. So many countries peaking. For some time now, we've seen, for instance, Italy peaking and Spain peaking and dropping back down in new cases, but some of these others maybe not. Germany, I think so. France, Iran, Switzerland. Switzerland, though it's on a smaller scale, is showing a very decided downswing. That's not what I wanted. I wanted Switzerland. That's also not what I wanted. Switzerland shows this really nice trend. And today's headline news says Switzerland is starting to talk about relaxing some of their restrictions because they are showing this very obvious long-term, multi-week downward trend. So go Switzerland. United States, certainly not quite so obvious as that. In a couple weeks, we will hopefully see more points down in the 15,000s, 10,000s range in just a few weeks. And then this trend line will believe that it's truly bent downwards, and we'll start to see that shape. So we have a lot of countries then that are showing that downward trend. But as always, I like and this is per million, I'll just pass briefly by there. Ireland has certainly passed everyone else in per million. It's got some very bad points upwards in terms of its per capita cases. Ireland is just way ahead of everyone per capita. Now it's only down here in the and it's in the almost in the, well, what is it, 18th or something out of 25. So in terms of total contribution to the world, it's not that huge. But for those living in Ireland, this is a very disturbing trend. It's seeing per capita growth, new cases that's beaten what anyone else has seen ever in this entire time that I've been tracking. Ireland is, well, we do have a bad point for Belgium as well, and that's why Belgium is doing a similar trend. Belgium also seeing some pretty bad per capitas, but our winners, such as it is in per capita cases per day, is Ireland. Ireland has a very bad thing going on here, and so we'll watch that. I'm going to pop down to the rope chart here just to take a quick look at how Ireland is trending, because even if they do have, and I don't think they used to be even maybe on this chart. I think they might literally have shown up on this chart in just the past week, because I only show the top 25 cases in total daily cases, 25 countries. So Ireland isn't looking too bad as far as trends go. It has been trending downward. It's kind of losing its steam in trending downward, but still only a 2% growth rate on average in new daily cases. So the news isn't terrible here in Ireland, but they really have they've got a very, very large number of cases, but fortunately that number is not accelerating upwards. They have a larger number of cases compared to their population. All right. Hello, Dari Young. I see your comment. So it looks like I'm streaming and looks like comments are working. So good. So that's Ireland. I will just continue here on the rope chart because it's my favorite. Here, the rope chart obviously trending downward. This is the general direction of the world by country of the top 25. We have very few strands here heading upwards, which means that all these countries, with a few exceptions, at least one exception, are heading in a direction towards turning the corner, towards peaking in daily new cases, and then heading back down the other side of that peak that we were seeing a couple graphs ago. All of these have peaked. Some of these, they're still pretty close to the line, so they could turn around if things go just so, but usually usually these lines are pretty straight. Usually when we see something head downward and cross zero, it just keeps going, but not always. California turned around and went back up after crossing zero. The United States turned around and went back up after crossing zero. So it can happen, but usually I think we can say with some safety that, especially if they continue to do what they've been doing, Austria, Switzerland, and the rest of these will do fine. They will recover. Now, if they decide to change something, in particular if they decide to start letting people outside again, that we might see that curve swinging upwards. We really don't know at this point what happens when you open a country or a state or a county, but I think we're about to find out. There are a lot of people banging on their doors to be let out, and there are going to be some places where they're going to do that. And then we'll have more data. We'll be able to say, well, this is what happens when you let people outdoors. Either it'll be fine, or it'll be terrible, or somewhere in between. And then we'll have evidence we'll have guidance for others trying to make that decision. I will point out this crazy one here, though. Ecuador, it is number 24. It was 25 yesterday. We tend to see the wilder curves from the smaller ones because they have fewer cases, and so statistically they can just swing a lot farther in a day without it being very unlikely. But Ecuador, nevertheless, rising into the top 25, rising now to number 24, and it's doing that thing that we hate. where a country, region, or a country, state, or county has a positive growth rate. This again is the zero line that indicates no new growth of cases day over day. Anyone above the zero line is seeing more and more new cases. But here's Ecuador. Not only does it see more and more new cases, 12%, 13%, but that's rising. That 12% is rising. So if Ecuador continues in this way, this is a at least for the moment, runaway growth, more and more cases every day, and accelerating. It's the only country doing that, and again, as a relatively small one in this picture, it may just be the noise of the data, and if it rises to the middle, it probably will mellow out a little bit. Russia is certainly our second worst. It has about the same 13% growth that Ecuador does, but it has this very nice to see trend downwards, where just a couple weeks ago it was at 20% daily growth, and now it's cut that to 13 and dropping. So Russia has a long way to go here. This isn't a very steep line. It seems like it's weeks from crossing zero, but if it continues this way, it will cross zero. Russia will cross zero. And same with Peru. Peru also rising. I don't think we talked about Peru a week ago because they weren't in the top 25, or maybe just barely, but now they are rising into the 25, rising to number 20, or number 20 in the list, I think that is. They've got a fairly solid growth rate, 10% a day of new cases. That's a lot. But at least they're not heading upwards. They're heading very slightly downwards in that growth rate. So Peru, Brazil also, much like Peru, has a positive growth rate, but heading slightly downward. Brazil is one of those ones we've been keeping a very close watch on, because Brazil has not been doing a lot of the things that other countries have to try to protect against this epidemic. They've been letting people be a little more, individually responsible, let's say, rather than collectively responsible. And we do consistently see that Brazil is it's not winning this race. It appears to be, it looks like it'll get to the end, to the finish line eventually, but it is certainly not winning when you look at all these other countries doing better than it. Because of the lockdown differences, maybe, hard to say. India, meanwhile, is, India just popped onto this top 25, I think 3 or 4 days ago. We've been talking about India even before it appeared in the top 25 because it looked like it was headed there. India is not doing too badly, 5% growth rate and dropping at a pretty good clip. We could imagine India leveling off and turning the corner in a week, but India has so much potential to go bad that we're going to have to keep a close watch on that one too. Japan has also had its own little mini scare. A couple weeks ago, it looks like, though, that peaked. When this curve turned the corner, that means that at least Japan has been heading back towards a better place. If you look at the graphs of Japan, they don't look that great. The ones you'll see in the news, it's like, it's going up and up. It's always going up. Even the number of new cases is going up. And that's true, and that's a problem. But these graphs, these rope charts, tell you when that's going to stop happening. They point towards when we're going to see the new cases dropping. And so we see these inflection points weeks ago that allowed us to say, well, yeah, Japan has it bad, but at least they're doing better and better. The only country we can't say that about right now is Ecuador. Every other country here in the whole world, well, in the top 25 of the world, there are probably lots of little countries that have very wild lines because they have so few cases. But of the countries with enough data to really show a reliable trend, only Ecuador shows a really disturbing trend of a relatively high growth rate and rising. The rest are all heading downward, and a whole lot of them have crossed zero to the point where their epidemics are shrinking. For instance, the United States has clearly, days ago, crossed that zero line. Now we do have a mini trend heading upwards here. So as we see some of these other states, Georgia, maybe Michigan, there are some states that are not looking quite as good. If they continue to rise, if certain states continue to rise faster than New York recovers, then we will see this trend continue, and maybe the United States will again turn the corner and turn back around the corner and head in the wrong direction. But again, we very seldom see something. I don't know that I've ever, well, 5% isn't that much. I would say I've never seen something hit the 10% line and then still turn around. So the United States is still in a precarious place, but it's certainly doing a lot better than, say, Ecuador. Let's look at a few of the other top 5. Spain is doing great. Italy, it's shrinking, but that's not as downwardly pointing as we'd like. So Italy has the potential to become a problem again. Germany is looking very good. France is looking good. And notice all of the top 5 are well below zero. They have negative growth, and they're all trending downward, with the possible exception of Italy, which is maybe trending towards trending upward. United Kingdom also has been a difficult spot, but it's got negative growth and heading in the right direction. Iran, we just keep going, all the big ones, until we get to Brazil, number 10 or so. Everyone is has turned the corner. Every single one of the top 10 countries, except Brazil, number 10, has turned the corner and is continuing to head downward. Brazil not doing so well, as we mentioned. Keep an eye on Brazil. Moving on to worldwide, we are seeing still a lot of the past 4 days, we've seen very significant daily growth in cases worldwide. Now, this may just be, what we're also seeing is various countries, including the United States, are changing the way they count cases. Sometimes they're considering probable cases in their case counts, even if they haven't officially tested positive. So maybe this has something to do with reporting. If so, then we'll see a little bit of an upswing, and then it'll head right back down again. But because the trend is down, even if the way we report it is different, we'll still see the trend down. The world is headed in a good direction, but it's not in a good place right now. It's at a average 12% daily growth in new cases. So the world is still seeing epidemic growth, pandemic growth. But at least it's headed in the right direction. Now, there was a time, we saw this mini trend here, where it looked for a while like the world was doing okay, really was turning, reaching the zero line, turning the corner towards negative growth. But just with a few extra days, 5 days in a row of positive growth where it's not dropping the way that it was here, we are starting to say, well, maybe the world isn't doing as well as it looked just a few days ago. And so we see these curves bend. So the news for the world isn't as good as it was before. But I will say, I still think it's very good news that the world, all the countries of the world are headed this way. Maybe what we're also seeing is a whole cluster of smaller countries that are suddenly getting a whole bunch of cases but haven't yet burst into the top 25, so we don't see them here, like Ecuador. Poland is new. Chile, I don't think, was here before. Peru was here one day before. Israel, I think, has been here. India, Austria, yeah, at that point where these are the countries we've been talking about. But I will also point out South Korea is gone. South Korea and China, by the way, they're both gone. They both have, according to the reported data, recovered to the point that their new cases are not in the top 25 in countries. And that's really saying something for China, because China has a huge population. And this, I don't believe, if I remember correctly, this top 25 is not weighted by population anyway. It's just who has the most cases. And so for China not to be here, and never really to have been here, either they're doing very well in their cases or they're misreporting their cases. And there's not a day that goes by without some other news story about how China may not be completely transparent. So who knows? We will be able to infer it from planefuls of people coming from China, probably, with the virus, just like we can infer when a plane full of people comes from Russia with the virus that maybe Russia is not also being completely upfront, which is truly alarming, given that Russia is our worst country right now in growth. If Russia isn't also being upfront and is the worst, then how bad are they really? And the same question may go for China. So we'll keep an eye on that. We can't make countries report accurately, but it sure would help the world if they did, so we'd all know what we're dealing with. Moving on to deaths. New deaths by country, the United States is leading. It did have a spike. Again, I believe this spike was entirely a reporting-related spike. I don't know if the United States has changed its reporting of cases, but I'm almost sure it changed its reporting of deaths and suddenly threw a whole bunch of deaths from the past few weeks in here because it thinks they're coronavirus even though they didn't test positive. So now that'll bump the curve up a little bit here as we're starting to report differently. But the long-term trends will not be changed by that. That just means that we've increased our totals by 10% or something, but they'll still rise and fall as the trends indicate. Deaths per million, let's look at the rope chart for deaths. Slightly downward by country, it's pretty good news. So-so do's. The death rates are probably slightly dropping. Well, we can see worldwide. Let's see what we see worldwide. Worldwide, oh, sadly, I saw this. I'm gonna have to look at why this is giving me garbage. But I can't see what the death rates are because I know this is the new cases. Hard to say. There was a plateau for a little bit and then boom, all of a sudden. Now, I will say that since the United States is the major contributor to deaths, and the United States suddenly yesterday reported a whole bunch of new deaths based on a new reporting mechanism, that's why we're starting to see that this is still arguably a plateau in world deaths with one outlier, or maybe this also is related to the United States new death reporting. But when the reporting changes, these graphs get confused and take a few days or weeks to really fully recover. We're going to see things. This looks worse than it is because nothing has really changed here in the number of people dying from COVID. It's just we are changing how we report it. So with that, then the United States curve, even with its very high increase of deaths due to the new reporting, the United States is still saying that it's crossed the zero line. It doesn't. This mini trend did not persist, and now we've blown it all up with this new reporting thing. But nevertheless, even with the negative pull of this data point, the trend line is downward. It says it's crossing zero, and that looks about right from what I'm seeing on from these data points. So the United States is doing fine overall in deaths. It is actually doing better in deaths than other countries, and it's actually doing better in deaths than in cases again. We have this case where this odd situation where the number of deaths appears to have peaked, even though, the number, that's the worldwide cases. I may be getting confused here. No, the United States deaths long since peaked. So ignore that. It's the world deaths that seem to be peaking before the cases peak. But in the United States, we're seeing about what you would expect, where first the cases peak, then the deaths peak. I'm going to pop over to my other dashboards just for a minute because they were trying to reload themselves, and I'm not sure they quite managed it. All right, I think they're working. So I am going to continue on then to the states of the United States. So if we look at the states of the United States, and I'm going to make another effort to cancel and reload the counties dashboard. It's fine. It just hasn't been updated since this morning, and maybe there's something new there, but it's still reasonable data today if I can't get this thing to update. The states, though, New York by far has the most total cases, followed by New Jersey, of course, Michigan, and everyone else. Here again, small caveat. Because of the way New York reports, I get this extra data point that doesn't belong there. One of these days, I'm just going to remove the most recent data point for New York only, but the effect is fairly small. It tends to make New York's numbers look a little better than they really are, but New York's numbers are looking so good already that they don't need much help. New York has plateaued here in terms of cases, long ago plateaued. New Jersey seems to be bending downward in per million. New Jersey had that crazy day where they threw 8 days all at the same time, which messes up my scale on the graph, but New York, again, plateauing. New Jersey actually has passed New York in new daily cases per capita, which is interesting. So in a very real sense, New Jersey is doing worse than New York now. They've always been tied, but New Jersey per capita is still trending upwards slightly, and New York is really turned downwards, starting to turn downwards. You'll see it better on the rope chart. Other major contributors, Massachusetts and Connecticut, both heading up at a pretty straight line, which is usually good news. It means they're turning the corner. States that are looking good, looking so obviously good that they've visibly turned the corner, even on the with the cases, daily cases trend line, are Michigan. Good news there. In Louisiana, two of those, they were looking very bad a couple weeks ago, and there was all sorts of reasons to think that things were going to go poorly in Michigan and Louisiana. But now they've bent their curves, and they seem to be well over the peak. So yay. Those were going to be our new epicenters, if anyone was. Illinois still, maybe. Where is Illinois here? Yeah, Illinois hasn't recovered quite as well, but you can definitely see them bending downwards. Also not looking to be an epicenter. California, not looking so great, but I mean bending and flattening, so good. There are worse states than California right now. For instance, Maryland, for whatever reason, is suddenly shooting upwards. Let's get back out just so we can see. No, actually, that's, yeah, Maryland was, I did like the zoom there. We've already talked about the really big ones, but Maryland, not looking so great, but again, not sweeping upwards in an exponential way, just going straight in a straight line, where some of these have flattened out or even turned downward. Looking at the rope chart, the states of the United States. Now we had this interesting effect. 2 days ago, California was suddenly bursting above zero and looking kind of bad. It recovered very quickly, but then Georgia burst above zero and was looking kind of bad. Now, as of today, Georgia remains in the slightly worrisome category here. It's got a flat, well, the growth rate is 3%, but it's not changing. That's not too bad. We've seen a lot worse than that. 20% is where I really get worried by a growth rate. 3%, and the same with Ohio and Massachusetts. Now, Ohio hasn't been really on our radar, but right now it's there just because everyone's doing better than it. There's this cluster of 3, and then there's everyone else who's, like Washington State's doing terrifically well. Louisiana, as we saw, very well. This is probably going to be Michigan. No, it's Florida. No, that's the dot. This is Michigan. Yeah, Michigan doing very well. I'm going to zoom in on the ones that are doing very well. I'm just going to grab a little bit above the top here so we can see those few that are above zero. So again, anyone below zero is doing well. Their growth rates are shrinking. But we also want to see them trending downward. And every single person below zero, every single state below zero is trending downward. There's only one trending upward. We'll look at that in a minute. But all the ones below zero, Texas and Wisconsin are especially Wisconsin's a little iffy. It's at zero and holding steady, so it's not getting better. But all these other states are looking really very good. And again, some of them are just doing terrifically well. Florida, Pennsylvania also quite good, 5, 6, 7% fewer cases every day and dropping. The only weird one here is New Jersey, which is consistent with what we saw in the other graph. Now this is not, I haven't heard this one on the news, and this is where I think my graphs tend to predict better than the news. The news just looks and says, okay, New Jersey's pretty flat, doing well. It seems to be at a plateau. But if you look at this graph, we see the first warning sign. I have heard nothing else about this, but this graph shows the first warning sign for New Jersey, which is New Jersey, after doing as well as New York for quite a while, and New York is right here, where it's doing very well, negative growth and accelerating downward. New Jersey is back to, it's just barely 1% growth, but it's trending upwards. Its growth is just very slightly trending upwards. And so if that continues, New Jersey is going to see an acceleration of its epidemic again, which is interesting. And I don't know why that is, but you heard it here first. New Jersey is really our only troubling spot, and even it is just barely troubling because it's still it's close to zero, and all it would take is 2 or 3 or 4 really good days and it would totally be back below zero again. It's barely busting above zero, but where everyone else is doing well in the top 25, there comes New Jersey. And New Jersey is making a comeback, and as we saw, is now past New York in per capita new cases. And that's because of this trend line. New Jersey is accelerating. Let's take a look at Georgia, because we often do talk about Georgia. Georgia, as always, not looking great, but not terrible. They've got a very slight downward trend and only a 3% growth rate. They're in the bottom of the pack, or at the top of this graph, but they're among the worst right now, and we'll see. We're getting. I just saw an article. I haven't heard it anywhere else. I don't quite believe it yet because it didn't have much in good data that's saying, oh, all these let's not shelter in place states are now seeing spikes. Well, all the let's not shelter in place states aren't in the 25 anyway, so we never see any data about them here. But if they are seeing spikes, and if they do continue to, eventually we're going to see new ones. We're going to see North Dakota or something coming into the top 25. So we'll keep our eye on that. But so far, we've seen no signs that in this data that those states are problems, and they certainly aren't a problem for the total United States picture because they just don't contribute many cases. I'll look at Colorado because I know people like Colorado. Colorado is looking okay, 4% negative growth, and very slightly getting even lower compared to everyone else. It's about in the middle of the pack. So yeah, let's look at Florida just for kicks. Have we ever looked at Florida? Yeah, Florida's looking pretty good, 8%, quite good. 8% drop day over day, getting even lower. The growth rate the shrinkage rate is increasing. It's going in the right direction, both in its position around the zero line and in its direction. Testing, as always, we've got a horse race here between New York and Louisiana. New York has taken the lead again after Louisiana briefly seemed to be winning or heading towards winning. Louisiana's slope still suggests that it may yet pass New York, but both of them are doing terrifically well, at least compared to the other states, and really compared to other countries. 3% of the population, they're pushing 3% of the population tested. That is very good. They're heading up towards that 3% mark. And again, 0.4% is adequate. And everybody here, every single state has tested at least 5 or 0.6% of their population. California, which I always look at, still doing poorly. It's the very bottom of the pack. Oh, did I not? I didn't even look at California, I don't think, in that. Or did I? Well, anyway, here's California. It does show acceleration, as our governor says. They're working on accelerating it even more. We obviously saw a sudden acceleration here, which was right when they promised it, and now they're promising another one. It would be great if it just starts heading up like this. At that rate, we could get into the 1 or 2% pretty quickly. But I don't remember if I actually looked at California here. Let me just pull it out quickly, just in case I didn't. This looks kind of familiar, as though I maybe did. California is looking okay. Is that exactly Colorado's curve too? Yeah, California and Colorado are lockstep. They're both 3% fewer cases each day. Good. Though I think we'll see in the county's report, probably that's all because of LA, which is getting rapidly better, while everyone else gets worse, or a lot of other places get worse. So California is really threatening to turn back into positive growth territory as LA becomes less of a factor. All these other counties are going to pick up the slack. But California's testing's okay, but still pretty bad. Best testers, of course, are, as we said, are Louisiana and New York. Massachusetts also doing great. I guess this is New Jersey doing very well, which I hope will help it overcome this challenge it's having right now. In Washington, we did see this thing with Washington where it seemed like they just sort of stopped testing. I'm going to switch down to this view so we can see how much testing is done each day. Take a look at New York, by the way. They're testing more and more people each day. In New Jersey, also slightly more and more people each day. But I was looking for, what was I looking for? What was I just looking at? Was it Washington State? Yeah, Washington State, which seemed to have just given up on testing according to the data. I'm not even sure if I believe that data, especially now, because here, boom, all of a sudden Washington State is saying that it tested 4/10 of its population, is that right? I think, in one day, and I doubt it. So more likely these were all just underreported and everything got thrown into here, and there's a whole bunch of points that should have been around here. And that was yesterday, and now today we have the trend more at a more reasonable level. So Washington State does not seem to have actually given up on testing, in spite of what the data from covidtracking.com says. I don't know where that went wrong, but we can see the trend is continuing here now in percent populated. They just kind of didn't get data for a while, and now it's picking up, and so it's doing all right, and that's good, because Washington State, though they're doing very well, I don't think anyone is suggesting they should stop testing. By county. Okay, so Los Angeles, though, as I was saying, Los Angeles is doing better. I hope we're going to see in the rope chart that they're doing better. We nevertheless see that they're still the major contributor and continue to have a lot of new cases every day. Even on a per day basis, they're the major contributor, though we do see this really nice thing that we only occasionally have seen so far. We saw quite a lot of countries like this. I don't think we saw any states with that curve to them, or did we? Let me just take a quick look again. New daily cases by state. New York is starting to think about curving downward, but really all it's done is plateau. Other than maybe Washington State, I don't think we've seen any states, any states with that sort of a actual peak and descent. So it is great to see a visible descent in a county of California, especially in this county of California, because it is certainly the major contributor. So there goes Los Angeles recovering. Unfortunately, Riverside seems to be determined to pick up the slack. It's not going to take long for these to converge if the trends continue in Los Angeles and Riverside. Now I'm going to zoom in here a little bit just to see if there are other counties. We need to do that. Other counties that are showing the trend. And yeah, we actually do see quite a few. San Diego has a clear curve. Santa Clara has these are so small compared to Los Angeles that they're not immediately obvious in cases they're small. Alameda has a clear turn of the corner. Contra Costa, San Mateo, San Bernardino. And so these should show up as in the rope chart as places that are not just negative, but way negative. They've been negative for a long time. They crossed that line a long time ago. That was the peak where they turned. The flat part here is where it goes zero in the next graph, and they're all of those are looking good. But Riverside, Orange, looking a little better. Sacramento, we see a few that are Tulare and Fresno, maybe not looking so good. But it's really hard to see from this this chart, which is why we have, we'll say per million just briefly. Riverside again per million, and Tulare is rivaling Riverside in per million. Worth noting that per million Los Angeles has fallen far out of the lead. It has been passed by those two counties, and it is about to be passed clearly by Santa Barbara and Kern. No one else looks likely to pass Los Angeles in cases, daily cases per million anytime super soon, but it certainly is not the leader in per capita cases anymore. So the rope chart, though, and this is where a few days ago we started to see, after there was what looked like a pretty good trend for California with most counties heading downward here, we started to see a fraying of our rope chart. That continues. So let's take a closer look. I'm just going to zoom in the time since things looked at least flat. Now, it's not to say that things are looking terrible, For California, about half of the counties are seeing negative growth, maybe a few less than half of the counties. There are some that are doing very well. Placer, Sonoma, Contra Costa, San Bernardino, even San Mateo here, though they're not angled downward, they're steady at a nice 9% negative growth, and that will get you there. If San Mateo can hold 9% negative growth, they'll be over the epidemic in no time. The concern is that this flat may be an inflection point that's going to head them back upwards. But they'd have a long rise to get there, so I think San Mateo is still looking pretty good. San Francisco, which was actually looking bad just days ago, is now trending in a good direction with a negative 5%, not very much, but a little bit of a negative growth and a very slight downward trend. So San Francisco looks like it may be turning the corner and recovering. Solano, like San Mateo, is negative but flat, and that's good enough. But with a 4%, it's going to take it a while to recover if it can't bring its line downward here. And then we have San Diego, which has been pretty good, but we have one really bad data point. Let's take a little closer look at San Diego. San Diego had been looking pretty good, and now they have a general pattern for a week and a half where they're starting to see more cases. And not enough, there are some negative growth days, but not enough to pull them back down. So San Diego is right on the line. It was headed downward, and now it's right on that line. It will never get over it if it stays on this line, so it needs to get down below, and in order to do that, it needs to turn its growth rate negative, or its growth rate trend negative. So San Diego not looking so good, but not in an emergency right now, like some, which we'll see soon. Let's take a look at some of the ones that are more emergencies. Monterey. Well, Monterey is so small, it's hard to say much about it in terms of cases. But Monterey it's got a very sharp, what is it that has Monterey going so radical all of a sudden? Because it was just sort of moseying its way downward. It was looking pretty good, had a really good day here. And now all of a sudden, a couple bad days, and Monterey is shooting upwards again. Too soon to say, but it just hasn't had enough weight of good days to say much about where Monterey is going. While we're at Santa Cruz, also was looking good a couple days ago, but unlike Monterey, has held its position. Both of these at the bottom of the list will swing a lot more wildly than the top ones, so don't read too much into either of those. But if we had to guess, Monterey's heading in the wrong direction, Santa Cruz is heading in the right direction. Looking again at the problems then, Santa Barbara is in the middle of the pack, does have enough data for this to be concerning. Santa Barbara with a 22% growth rate, that's extraordinary. That's really a very fast growth of new cases and headed upward. So by far, Santa Barbara is our worst county today. These things can switch in a matter of days, as we've seen. Ventura also not looking so great. Tulare is got a pretty high growth rate, but at least is trending downwards a little bit. And then we've got this pack of a bunch of them that are fairly flat, slightly positive, not a huge growth, but certainly not getting better. None of them are getting better. Or very barely, maybe, if you look at Riverside. Interesting that Riverside, not Riverside? I thought I saw Riverside. Let me see, that was probably in the other graph. Where was it that I was seeing Riverside and it was looking bad? Didn't I just see Riverside looking bad? Maybe I pointed at what sometimes happens is I point at something and I pick up, that's probably it. I probably picked up Riverside dot as I was trying to point to this. So it's not Riverside that's our problem county. It is Santa Barbara. I think I actually corrected that. Anyway, Santa Barbara, yes. Riverside, they still have positive growth. There's fairly bad growth at a 7% growth rate of new cases every day. That's not great, but at least they're trending downward. So Riverside it's caught in this mix here of all the counties, all the middle ones. There are all the really good ones doing well, and then there are these 5 doing poorly, and there's everyone in the middle who's kind of hanging out at 0 and not getting any better. The epidemic's never going to be over for these places until they turn south. The only one that's really doing that is Kern, which really does have, it's below 0 and turning south. The rest of these are just sort of flirting with 0. And then we've got one here, Marin, which is not does not have a great trend, positive and headed upwards. Testing by county. So let's just take a quick look at the top, just to give a sense of the state as a whole, or rather in terms of its largest contributors. So this is not good. And this is kind of what we were seeing in the earlier charts, but presented differently. You look at the top 5 counties in terms of new daily cases, and Los Angeles is doing very well. 10% drop every day, and dropping, though they did have a bad data point once, but it's not enough to swing it around. So I think Los Angeles is doing fine. I think they will continue to do fine, but things can always turn around if really exceptionally out of whack data starts to come in. But all the rest of these, none of them are looking great. And none of them are running away with it, but they're all just sort of hovering at the maybe 5% and slightly rising or slightly falling mark. So Los Angeles is saving the state's numbers. When we look at the California's general trend, it is looking slightly good. But when you look at this, you got to say that's just because of Los Angeles. There are a few other. Certainly there are other counties. San Francisco is significant, but Los Angeles is the one that is carrying all the weight right now. And as long as it keeps having, zoom this one out a little bit, as long as Los Angeles keeps having way more daily cases than anyone else, then its recovery will make the state look good. But we're just a week away from the point where Los Angeles recovers and the whole state starts to look bad again if all these counties can't get their growth rates under control. So California's a mixed bag here for sure. Los Angeles, good. San Francisco, sure. I will briefly look at the Bay Area because people also seem to care about that. I don't remember these being in a cluster. I think they've moved around a little bit. Monterey, Santa Cruz. Is there another one? I always feel like there should be a 7th county here. I think San Joaquin, it's not a Bay Area county, but we were just looking. I actually didn't know where San Joaquin was until I looked it up a couple days ago, but it's a significant contributor. It is very close to the Bay Area. If I have my map right, it's right across the mountains, kind of from the East Bay, or it's in the Central Valley, and so there's probably a fair bit of back and forth between San Joaquin and the Bay Area. People who live in San Joaquin and work in the Bay Area, people who live in the Bay Area work in San Joaquin. And so I'm going to include this. And it's worth noting, San Joaquin is big in cases. It's in the middle of the pack, certainly nothing like a Los Angeles, but it's in the middle of the pack, and it is not doing well. 13% and growing. And Monterey, well, never mind Monterey. We already said it's too small to be a major contributor. But as far as the Bay Area goes, we'll call it the Bay Area plus San Joaquin, it's okay. Santa Cruz is too small to matter in the big numbers, but Alameda is looking good. San Francisco is looking good. Those two certainly help a lot for the general picture of the Bay Area. San Mateo is holding steady. It's not running away with it. Alameda, Santa Clara. This is Santa Clara. Santa Clara is not looking great, but it's kind of surviving at the 0 line. But then we've got these two, Monterey, which doesn't that much matter in the big numbers. Let's just take these off just so we can see how's the Bay Area doing in terms of numbers, in terms of its contribution to the state numbers. And it's a mixed bag, but once you take them out, probably I'd say generally good. The big counties here, the biggest ones, Santa Clara isn't hurting too much. These 3 are all helping. And San Joaquin is hurting, but it's so much smaller than the others in cases that it's not that big a deal. But we got to watch San Joaquin. It's pretty big. It's pretty close to the Bay Area and other population centers that it can infect. If it gets out of control, we're going to see San Jose and Berkeley and Oakland and whoever else start to catch it from San Joaquin probably. So that's got to be brought under control before we can feel really good about the Bay Area. The rest of the Bay Area, though, is doing pretty good. Pretty good Bay Area. California as a whole, pretty good. United States, pretty good. And the world is doing really pretty good. So that's the news. The news is pretty good. Not quite as good as I think as it was 7 days ago, though. So I feel like we're slipping a little bit. But many places are recovering, and we're just treating these separately because each place is different, and some of them go crazy up and some of them go crazy down at the same time. So we'll keep an eye on the hot spots, but there are a lot of cool spots, and there are a lot of spots that are cooling off. So generally, the news is good. I'm Greg Farrar. That is the COVID-19 trend news for April 17th, 2020. Thanks for watching.